Completely understand, and that's what I'm trying to say is, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to come here, is you know, because like let's say there's fans that have never come into contact with you, and they do some exploration, and they're going to come in contact with ideas that they're not familiar with. My point is not to get locked into the idea of whether you're right or I'm right or you're wrong and I'm wrong. It's to be okay with letting those ideas onto the table and not be afraid of exploring them. Now, if you as an individual listen to your ideas and you say, I just don't get it, I don't resonate with that, then you should follow your own heart. You know what I mean? We're humble enough to admit that we're just men, right? Imperfect and flawed in our own way. All I'm trying to say is we shouldn't be afraid of the debate. The debate is necessary because if everything's so great, why do most of my family feel the pressure of the economy? They keep talking about how the job numbers go up. Well, not in my family.
Totally fake numbers. But I think you've hit a deep truth here, Billy, and that it's simply getting outside the box. It's accepting other ideas, not being threatened by them, and really having a real discussion. And why in this modern system is that so taboo? That is un-American, it's anti-human, it's anti-Renaissance, it's anti-common sense, and that is something no one can disagree with. Anybody that calls for shutting down ideas, anybody that calls for narrow parameters, they're the enemy of humanity.
Exactly. So let's use the Coney thing as an example. I've read things and saw things that you talked about with the Coney stuff. I want to do my own investigation on it, right? You've told me what you thought about it. I know to not just take the let's call it the mainstream narrative of that story. Now I also know that many of my fans are invested in the story. How do I know? They Twittered me about it. They asked me to get involved, be part of the chain of people that were spreading the information on the documentary. I haven't watched the documentary myself. If it's a propaganda piece, I want to see it with my own eyes. If it's something that actually touches me. Where the stupidity will come in is somebody say, well, don't you care about children in Africa, or don't you care about what? Of course I do. I'm a human being. But these are very complex ideas oftentimes, and if we break them down into their micro, we miss the macro. And in the macro, there's obviously something going on globally that is a far greater danger to humanity than any particular issue. So we have to be human enough to both address the micro issue, but we can't take our ball off the macro. For example, one thing I just shake my head on, and I'm probably wrong in the statistics, but like what's going on with Greece with the debt deals. As far as I know, and if I'm wrong, I'm sure I'll hear about it. But they had to sell their lottery. They're giving away islands now. And then you find out, from reading different economists, that 90% of that debt is paper debt, right? It's
well, Goldman Sachs got their president and finance minister to back up the bankers' debt. So they're selling everything to prop up the too big to fail. Yeah.
But then you can understand why somebody in Greece is sitting there saying, okay, we supposedly owe all this money, but yet, it's not like we got all these roads built or these schools and we went crazy. There's nothing to really show for it.
Total fraud.
So that's where you have to look and say something's going on systemically in the global system that's very troubling. You see these things come up, and if you pay enough attention and certainly read outside the American media, if you read European media, there's a great concern for what's going on.
Oh, they admit it's the bankers engineered this, it's a coup, but they're holding us hostage. What do we do? The Europeans actually are informed and want to know the truth. And back to the Coney thing, day one, George W. Bush is endorsing it. Well, this is a known war criminal. So right there, okay, George Soros is involved. Okay, the State Department's involved. Okay, this guy hadn't been seen in 5.5 years. Okay, they want this oil. Okay, and then you find out the whole story. It's just there's a bad man, we're invading Africa, and the average American doesn't even know where Africa is. So it's just like, our troops are over there fighting that bad man. And that's where the lack of debate and just this one-dimensional of we're the good guys.
And that's why I'm saying I appreciate the alternative viewpoint that you bring into this, because that's what needs to happen. It needs to be measured against the other ideas that are come. Because most of the if I was to say if I was going on my Twitter and say, okay, why do you care about the Coney thing? The number one thing is kids, women being abused, raped, mutilation. So it's where those negative systems, if we can quantify them as that, take real human desire to want to help something, the oppressed and the, and then it gets mixed into an agenda. And so if you try to put yourself in the middle of that agenda, you'll be attacked as somebody as being unsympathetic enough.
Exactly. They use the one-dimensional nature. Instead of saying, okay, these global corporations have been caught killing 100 times that, and they certainly don't care about these populations. They've used these emotional appeals, waving the bloody shirt, over and over again. Are we going to take the bait again? But I get it. They're going to then attack you and say, you're not a nice man. You want to hurt the children.
I don't want to hurt the children. That's what I'm saying is, and that's why I would say to anybody who's one of my fans, is where you turn the corner on this is not to be afraid of the ideas. You take the ideas onto your own table, you discuss them with your family, your wife, and then you make your own decision.
Exactly. Don't let somebody else make the decision.
That's it. I'm not here to advocate your position or my position. I'm here to advocate the concept of liberty, right? And we're two people who are expressing it in different ways. I express it through music. You express it through a vigorous political, social debate.
The ancients, get back to the Greeks, as you know, called it the wisdom of the street or the common man. Kind of that general consensus throughout cultures has been decided that's the best place. And before we did this interview tonight, you were bringing up John Lennon, and he had that street credibility. Speak to that.
Well, I think it's really interesting. In the rearview mirror now, we know that was it the CIA or the FBI?
Both.
Okay. Well, they had their eyes on him. Why did they have their eyes on John Lennon? Here's a guy saying all you need is love. Because when a person amasses enough individual power outside of a system, they're dangerous. They're dangerous to that system. And that's why I think there's a systemic level of control, whether it's put in at the entry level, the mid-level, or the top levels, or all levels, to kind of try to keep people like that marginalized, And I think now we're going to be seeing the digital form of that marginalization. You call them hit pieces. Well, there's going to be the digital version of that.
Well, what they do is they create a artificial grassroots movement that wants to help children, and really it's a cover for a giant continent-wide invasion for resources.
In that particular instance, I hope that you're wrong, and I hope that it is about children, and I hope that it is about the humanitarian thing. The problem is we have plenty of history to indicate that that's not always the case.
You're right.
And that's why your ideas about it should be taken into that debate and examined, and not feared because it seems to be counter to a humanitarian idea. If you can look at your concepts in the macro, you're saying if this is what goes on, we'll save more children, we'll help more people if we clean these systems up. If we get caught up in the micro debates, that's why we get into this rigidity in our country, and it gets really dumbed down, and the public discourse goes down to, you're an idiot.
Well, that's what I've learned, is that if they left African countries alone on average and let them use their own resources, Africa would be a jewel. But Western corporate interest, no, they can just go wreck a country, fund rebels, or fund the neighbor to attack, and then come in and get it for nothing.
Yeah, well, I'm sure you read Confessions of an Economic Hitman.
Oh, yes.
Is it John Perkins
yes.
is the author? That's a fantastic guide from somebody who was in that system that talks about how Western corporate interests come in and exploit the people of Africa.
Exactly, and he talks about how they'd have a PR article, in the New York Times, Washington Post, about how the person was a war criminal, even if they weren't, as a way to just depose them. And so, that's the thing. The globalists follow the same models over and over again.
Well, because they work.
Exactly. So it's like, oh, I've seen this. How do you know a 57 Chevy? You see it over and over again.
Yeah.
And then you see the trendies getting conned by it. You see everybody going through the same motions. And it's just so frustrating to see it happening.
Well, the quote that I always think about, having been in this media system for over 20 years, is it's either Schopenhauer or Kant, but it's something along the lines, and I'm sure I got it wrong, but it's like, first they ignore you, then they try to destroy you, then they try to co-opt you or buy you in, and then they claim you. And I think that's a really good guide for anybody to look at any public figure. I don't care who they are, an actor, a playwright, that system does come into play at some level. And I think that until that system is eradicated, there's a struggle there that taps a key human resource, which is innovation, and sort of puts it through something that is ultimately serving somebody else's interest. And I think that you have books that is it The Fountainhead or the Ayn Rand, Ayn Rand, where she basically talks about that particular blueprint. And I've read interesting information to suggest that she was Illuminati and she was expressing some sort of other deeper blueprint. It's an interesting debate to consider. But as somebody who's thrived on the largest stages in that, somebody who's taken himself off that stage, and somebody who's readdressing it now from a different, more humanistic angle, I can say that it pains me now, at my age now, I'm going to be 45, to watch where young, talented people are put into that meat grinder from the get-go, and they're put into it now at an accelerated rate that's sort of unprecedented, and the technology is in many ways aiding and abetting that system. So it's up to us to be a little bit more cautious, because right now America needs young people to be smart. We need them to be debating. We need them to be protesting for things that really matter and not getting caught up into quasi-side arguments like wealth distribution. Because that's really not the argument. You know what I mean?
Exactly. The debate should be how to generate wealth, not how we're going to redistribute it. I was reading that at South by Southwest, I guess yesterday or so, you challenged some of the people there about stop trying to be so cool or trendy. What did you mean by that?
Well, I think what happens is, in my particular world, trendiness has now become part of the business model. And you have a lot of websites that exist, let's call it in an independent tier, that have gone into business where creating exclusivity principles, you're not cool enough to listen to this band, we know what's cool. That's become part of the business model. But what it's done is it's hurt the overall creativity of the business, and it's also hurt the ability for a young artist who maybe starts in an independent world because they're gifted. It hurts their ability to transition into the mainstream, and that lack of transition to the mainstream keeps those vital new ideas from entering into the bigger world. And then you have, so essentially you have a widening gulf where you have an invested indie world which really doesn't want their artists to succeed beyond a certain...
Compartmentalized niches.
Thank you. And on the other hand, you have a growing corporate representation of music, which most people find alienating if you're a real music fan.
I can't listen to any of it. I mean, all the new stuff is just, it's bizarre.
It is bizarre the way technology has affected what pop music has become. I'm not saying it's all bad, but it's hard when I came from a world which valued certain systems of integrity to see that eroded basically to separate into two niche interests which really don't serve the overall whole.
Billy, you were telling me last night that more and more you realize that the answer to just pure empty commercialism, to put words in your mouth, is a spiritual understanding. And of course, you're not going to find that in a church or in some box. But I mean, for you, your spiritual walk, your spiritual awakening, I tend to agree with you. I think that's really the answer to this artificial system, is people tuning into the fact that we're in a limitless universe.
Yeah, I find it inspiring sometimes when you talk about how when you're not really sure what to do, you go outside and look at the stars and you become, integrated with the cosmos, you realize your place in it. And I think that's what we all have to do. We can't be so selfish as to not consider others. We can't be so selfish as to not think that what we do in irresponsibility doesn't have an impact on somebody else. There's that, you've seen the commercial or the thing in the movie where the guy knocks over the bottle and somehow it's 14 steps down and, somebody gets hit by a bus or something. There is a continuity in quantum physics to what we do, the power of intention, the laws of attraction. And I think, and it's by no means a criticism, but we discussed it in terms of your program. I think that, kind of like I alluded to before, we all have to start thinking what success looks like. If we don't like the system that's in place, and hopefully we'll be able to engage your democracy to change it, that would be my hope. What does success look like? What does a healthy democratic system look like in 2012? I mean, we're a far way from it, and I bet if you polled 100 people on the street, most people would say our democracy is in need of an update. But it isn't like these jerk-offs writing on there, the Constitution doesn't work anymore. You start to see those articles start popping up. Constitution's outdated. The Constitution's not outdated.
No, we left it is the problem.
Yes. So a return to constitutional values, emphasis on liberty and freedom, not being afraid of innovation and new ideas, rigorous debate. But what does that look like? Let's say we could wave a magic wand and we have the democracy that we can be proud of. What does that look like? In 2012, I think we need to start focusing on that because the power of intention is strong. You know, we have to see what happiness looks like, and we'll know whether to go left and right as we walk down this particular.
I agree with you. That's the biggest part I'm missing is I'm just trying to get people to wake up and see the attack we're under. But you're right. You've got to have something to sell against that.
Right. And I see interesting things. I see where people are doing co-op farming. People are